Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and today I would like to review chapter 11 of Theory of Culture, and that is Culture as Text, Narrative and Hermeutics. So let's just get straight to it then. Chapter 11, Culture as Text, Narrative and Hermeutics. Section 1, Structuralist Poetics. When Levi Strauss looked at the Oedipus myth, he had little interest in the story as a bearer of the meaning. Rather, his primary concern was with the way that concepts should be plucked out of the narrative to uncover an underlying structure. Another significant current in structuralism, however, has been concerned with the investigation of narrative and its ways. It is sustained by the sequential organization of sign. Roland Barthes asserted that we need to study syntaxism as well as the system in his SZ set about explaining how one particular story worked. In The Pleasure of Text, moreover, he argued that the storyline was a major source of gratification of the reader with its anticipations and announcements. When structuralism supports the analysis of the narrative, especially conventional stories, when literature, their activity is often given the name of structuralist poetics. Section 2, Vladimir Propp. Vladimir Propp can be considered a true pioneer in the structural analysis of culture. Written in the 1920s, his work on the morphology of the folktale substantially predated that of Levi Strauss on myth. Propp's major interest was on the thematic organization of such popular traditional stories. For example, does the structure of other kinds of story follow that of the folktale? How, if at all, does the structure of the folktale correspond to social forces and needs? Does the structure of the folktale indicate something beyond itself? With respect to this question, we can detect a different emphasis in the work of Levi Strauss. The great French anthropologist was concerned to document the universality of the binary opposition, the need for mythologies to meditate on the dilemmas and contradictions of the human existence, and the links between mythology and the workings of the human mind. He suggested that certain modes of literature tend to feature particular trajectories with respect to goals or aspirations, in what he calls comic fictional modes and romance. For example, things usually get better, even though the characters may experience a near disaster at some stage. The story usually ends up with a stroke of good fortune, such as marriage, inheritance, or the death of the villain. Section 3, Mikhail Bakhtin. Bakhtin's reputation centers around two main concepts, the dialogic and the carnival. The idea of the dialogic taps into the creative and relational aspects of the novel and was used by Bakhtin to critique Saussurean approaches to the symbolic. He dubbed such a perspective abstract objectivism, as it failed to take account the ways that the meanings of works can change over time or vary according to the specific cultural context within the readers that was situated. Bakhtin also stressed the role of the social or historical context in shaping the meanings of words and signs. He suggested that these would shift over time between social classes. As a result of words and signs would often be ambiguous and characterized by multi-accentuality. A speech act or written text could expect to encounter a tension between the centripetal meanings that allowed for mutual understanding and the more centrifugal forces that tended toward heteroglossia. He writes, every concrete utterance of a speaking subject serves as a point where centrifugal as well as centripetal forces are brought to bear. Bakhtin looked upon heteroglossia too as a good thing. Section 4, Umberto Eco, the role of the reader. The work of Italian semiotician Umberto Eco provides another avenue for exploring these questions, offering a critique of orthodox structural poetics from within the camp. Eco is broadly sympathetic to the orthodox structuralist analysis of the text, but he tries to combine this with an attention to openness, ambiguity, and the readerly. His perspective then is both appreciative and critical. Eco highlights the role of anticipation in the inferential leaps, fantasy, identification, and problem-solving activity, suggesting that successful narratives work to stimulate these sorts of processes by the means of skillful deployment of cultural codes. Where Echo moves beyond structuralist formalism is in extending his discussion to include the impact of these codes on the reader. He suggests that the powerfully drawn binary oppositions and the stereotype villains appeal to popular standards. This is especially in the case in time of international tensions. Popular notions of wicked communism exists beside those the unpunished Nazi criminal. Section 5. Narrative and Social Processes. Victor Turner's work is an important point of reference for those who wish to indicate the narrative or fictive dimensions of social processes in the real world. A possible problem with Victor Turner's work is that it tends to depict movement through the stages of social drama as inevitable. A notable feature of Wagner Pacificai's book is to highlight not only the possibility of an incomplete sequence, but also to foreground the need for human agency and strategy in order for a resolution to come about. This more elevated representation of events could justify human sacrifice, thus providing cultural groundwork for war that had been absent during Suez. In a more complex investigation, Ronald Jacobs used Fry's approach to narrative alongside Habermas' ideas about the public sphere to explore Rodney King's crisis. Section 6. Bakhtin on the Carnivalesque. Aside from tracing the implications of particular narrative frames for particular events, like the studies above, it is also possible to begin with a genre or narrative form and explicate its less specific transhistorical, social, or political consequences. This focus on the sensual, the grotesque, and the embodied, and the excessive, and the so great attention in the genre is paid to prodigious feats of eating, excreting, strength, laughter, and sexuality. Bakhtin looks upon the genre favorably, suggesting that it is politically subversive, because it celebrates ambiguity over hierarchy, the debase over the exalted, the open and public over the secretive and official. As the quotations just provided might suggest, it can be argued that Bakhtin's analysis of the carnival genre is rather value-added. And although he celebrates the carnivalesque as a form of popular resistance to authority in all ages, he fails to consider in a serious way the limited political possibilities of such undirected popular activity. Section 7. Hermeneutics. There are strong affinities between the hermeneutic tradition in social science and those advocating the centrality of the narrative. Hermeneutics as an area is concerned with issues of meaning and mutual understanding. Traditionally, it is tended to be subjective, humanistic, individualistic, and aesthetic, philosophical, and phenomenological in orientation. In the context of literary criticism, for example, it has been centrally concerned with theorizing whether the reader can recover the meanings and thoughts held by the author. In thinking through the implications of this shift, Goethe began to move away from the Parsonian vocabulary of norms and values for describing cultural life and work instead on a richer understanding of the stuff of culture. And so it was during the 1960s, Goethe came to an understanding of culture as an incredibly complex texture of sign, symbols, myth, routines, and habits that cried out for a hermeneutic approach. This tendency can lead to events being explained in purely local and therefore somewhat relativistic and tautological terms. The cockfight. Goethe shows us that it can be understood as an exemplary product of baseline culture. Old Bali. And that's all from me. Thank you very much for watching. Stay home, stay safe, and have a good night.